Ben, Reuters is reporting that President Obama has signed a secret order authorizing covert U.S. support for rebel forces. I want to talk to Ben Wiedemann about that. Let's talk about that also with retired U.S. Army General George Jalwan, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. If, in fact, this is true, General Jalwan, that the president in recent days, maybe the past week or two, signed a covert action order, a finding as they call it, to secretly assist the rebels who are fighting Gaddafi's forces. What does that say to you?
Well, first of all, I have no knowledge of whether he signed a finding or not. It may be one of two things. It may be an actual sort of action, or it could be to keep pressure on Gaddafi to really feel the heat that he's feeling now with the resignation of his foreign minister. Also, with what I think is happening in London, where the international community is now very much united in what needs to be done for him to leave.
For all practical purposes, the coalition, now NATO-controlled, they have taken a side in this war, in this civil war. They want to help the rebels. They want to see Gaddafi go, even though the UN Security Council resolution didn't go that far, as we all know. Here's the question. If, in fact, the president signed a secret finding that goes way beyond what the coalition has accepted, including the UN Security Council, how much of a wrench does that throw in the NATO consensus? How much does it complicate what NATO is doing?
It does, to a degree, complicate it. But remember, this is directed at one individual, not at bombing forces which is not included in the UN resolution. I think it's a separate action. How this will affect the coalition, how this will affect the entire NATO group, I'm not sure. But it will have an impact. If true, it will have an impact. But I think it also will have an impact on Gaddafi, and I think that's intended.
Because some of those countries, the NATO allies, specifically Germany and Turkey especially, they're not going to be very happy about this. Stand by for a moment. I want to go back to Ben Wiedemann. He's joining us from eastern Libya. He's embedded with the rebel forces. How's this going to play over there? I assume the rebels are getting arms from the outside. We don't know if the president of the United States covertly signed this finding authorizing arms shipments directly or indirectly to the rebels, but I assume they'd be thrilled if the president did, Ben.
Well, certainly at this point, they're fairly desperate for more help because clearly a no-fly zone is simply not enough to stop the Libyan government forces from launching the kind of offensive seen here over the last 2 days. In fact, today, a senior official from the Libyan Transitional Council said that they would welcome foreign trainers on the grouping of change of attitude. Initially, certainly when we first got here, shortly after the outbreak of this revolt, there was a real stress on their desire for no foreign intervention whatsoever. But as the going has gotten tough and has softened, and certainly they would welcome some sort of UN involvement, help them turn the tide, so to speak, because at the moment, clearly simply outgunned, out-organized, out everything.
Yeah, it certainly seems like that. Apologize for that transmission, but obviously he's in eastern Libya. It's not easy to get any signal out of there to begin with. General Jalwan, it looks to me, and you're a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, that the pounding of Gaddafi's forces from the air, the aerial bombardments, have eased up over the past 24 to 48 hours as the Libyan government and their regime, they've made this offensive. Here's the question. Now that NATO is in command of the aerial strikes, has there been a reduction compared to when the U.S. was strictly in control of the aerial strikes against ground forces loyal to Gaddafi?
Yes, in my view, yes. And I think that is now because you have a wider coalition involved. NATO's involved. NATO is a political body. And as you said, there are some nations as part of that NATO that have had reservations about the conducting of direct airstrikes. And so I think you're going to see that'll play out. The more important thing to me that needs to be understood, even if what I've seen of the rebel army, and your reporters may know differently, it's going to take an enormous amount of equipment and training and time to train them up where they could be an effective force, in my view. I think the psychological impact that we're seeing may have more of an effect than what can be done on the ground.
The psychological impact of
the pressure we're putting on, particularly on Gaddafi, outlawing him from the international community. If this finding is true, I think all of that will have, I think, a psychological impact on Gaddafi.
What is your understanding? And this is a little technical, and we don't know if the President of the United States has signed any finding for that matter, but what does the law say about signing a finding to kill a foreign leader, whether bin Laden or somebody else?
We have had findings in the past, so I'm sure this has been tested by law. You'd have to ask lawyers about that question, but there have been findings in the past. And again, the president puts his own signature on this, and he authorizes it. And it's very seldom used, but it has been used, and I think will continue to be used.